All right. So, Daddy, start again and tell us who you are and about the beginning of your life.
Okay, my name is George D. Wilson Jr. I was born at a place called Love's Mill in 1931.
Daddy, where was Love's Mill?
Love's Mill was in Whiteford, Maryland, and it was actually a grist mill run by a water wheel. And all three of us children, my brother John, my sister Mary Louise, were born here. It was a stone house. This went out. I don't know whether that makes any difference or not. It was a stone house and very high moisture, which was detrimental to my mother. So my father looked for somewhere else to move to on higher ground. So the Maples Farm in Street, Maryland came available.
Let's hold on there. So you said that Love's Mill was on in Whiteford. Was that on Deep Run Road or Delp Road? Well, if you think of that, we'll come.
I would not know what road it was.
Okay. And was the mill still on the farm
The mill was not on the farm. But it was operational.
I see. So that little community was called Love's Mill after the mill.
It was owned at one time or another by the people of the name of Love.
Okay. But that little community was called Love's Mill the way that Mill Green is called Mill Green or Highland's called Highland.
That is true.
Okay.
Yes.
And who were some of the neighbors down there?
That I don't know.
Were the Ramsburgs?
No, the Ramsburgs. When my father moved to Highland, Gilmer Ramsburg was my father's, I guess you would say, a tenant farmer. He came to Love's Mill and farmed the farm on shares. And I'm not sure how many years, but it was a number of years that this coexist. And eventually, my father sold the farm to Gilmer Ramsburg.
Did Grandpa sell that farm to Gilmer Ramsburg the same year he bought the Taylor place?
No.
No.
That I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that's not correct. I would say it was preceding it. I would guess almost about 1936.
Okay. And what about the Delp family? Were they neighbors?
It was a very prominent, Delps were a very prominent family in the neighborhood, and yes, they were a neighbor, but I can't tell you exactly what location they were neighbors to us.
Now, was that Hodder Delp? Was it Hodder?
That name does not ring a bell. I just remember the name of Delps.
Okay. Well, if that anything like of that comes back.
Uh-huh.
So, and of course, you were only a year old
Yes.
when your family
Yes.
moved from Love's Mill up to Highland.
That's correct.
Yeah. Now, and this was 1932, so it was the depth of the Depression.
Very much so.
And so how was it that your family had the financial wherewithal to buy a farm?
The only thing I can say is that, and I'm not exactly sure on this, but Uncle Charles Schuster, my mother's brother and father, John Schuster, were very successful in the breeding of leghorn chickens, and people came from miles around to buy their leghorn chickens. Keep going. So I'm not sure whether Daddy borrowed money from Uncle Charles at the time to buy the Maples Farm in Street, Maryland or not. I do not know. But we did move to the Maples Farm in 1932. It had less than 15 acres of clear land on 76 acres, and when the family by the name of Wheelers owned the farm and they built the barn, one of the neighbors said to Mr. Wheeler, "Well, what are you going to fill that barn with? Stumps?" Because it was a huge barn, which with about 22 stalls for a dairy herd, and there was only just as I said, very few acres of cleared land when my father bought it.
Now you say the Wheelers, was that Gus Wheeler?
Mr. Gus Wheeler, yes.
Now, and he was married to a cousin of your father's.
That is correct.
And their son was Wilson Wheeler.
That is correct. Yes.
And Wilson Wheeler was the father of who married the Wiley. Wasn't that cousin Catherine Wiley? Wasn't she the daughter of Wilson Wheeler?
I think that is correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So and do you know why? So Grandpa bought the Maples farm from Gus Wheeler.
On the fact that it was right in the community of Highland, it had a beautiful home which was very much in disrepair, had a huge barn and had much potential, and I think my father saw the potential of this farm.
So the house was in disrepair, so had the Wheelers fallen on hard times?
Evidently.
Okay.
Because this was the preceding of the recession or depression, whichever one you want to call it.
But Grandpa did buy the farm directly from Gus Wheeler.
And that's what I understand,
Okay.
yes.
And was Leon Wells working for Grandpa at that time?
No, at that time, we went through several different families. One family I remember distinctly when I was probably about 6 years old, no, younger than that, maybe 5 years old, was a family by the name of Keg Garrison, who came up out of North Carolina. Now, North Carolina was very depressed, and a lot of people came out of the Carolinas seeking work on the farms in Harford County.
Now, was this a white family or a colored family?
It was a white family.
So he had a white hired man for a time.
And their son was named Danny Garrison, who was the same age as I, and we were both in the first grade together. And I don't know what made him, but my mother, of course in those days, the mothers packed the lunch for the children for school, and my mother had put a little container of green Jello in my lunchbox. And then the Garrison saw the green Jello, and for some reason or other, he went up to the teacher and told the teacher that my mother had packed me poison. He thought the green Jello was poison, and I'm sure this was connected with arsenic, and why this child knew about arsenic and green coloring, I do not know, but this I do remember.
Now the Hashes came to the area the same way, didn't they? Weren't they hired people for cousin Russell Galbraith?
This could be. I believe you're correct on that. Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Leon came to us. Well, first of all, we had. I'm not sure whether he was a brother-in-law or whom of Leon. He was a black man. He worked for my father, and then I'm not exactly sure what year Leon came, but it had to be probably about 1935, 36, 37 in that area, because and he had two sons, I remember, Henry and Dennis, who, and they were all very musical and self-taught. They could play the piano, they could play the banjo, they could play the guitar, and it was just a natural thing with them. So when I was 6 years old, I think probably, I'm not sure whether it was November, and around that time I contracted diseases, pneumonia, chickenpox, all kinds of mumps, just all kinds of childhood diseases, and I was on my deathbed. Actually, I didn't know it, but my temperature ran high. I can remember my mother spending hours bathing me with cold, wet cloths, trying to lower my temperature. And I knew I was really sick when my father let our pit bull Tip come up to the bedroom and visit me. I knew then. I said I must be sick, because he would never allow a dog in a house. And Leon's son Dennis and Henry would come up to the house after they came home from school with their guitar and banjo, and they would sit up in the room and play songs and sing for me in the evenings.
So they were older than you?
Oh yes, they were probably teenagers.
Mm. Now, when you say they came home from school, did they go to the school at Hickory, or
No,
was there another school?
it was a one-room school down to Rocks.
Now, this was in the days of segregation.
Absolutely, yeah.
So this was a one-room school run for colored families.
That is
As we
correct.
said, in those days, we said colored. That was the polite term. Yeah.
That was correct. The high school at Hickory was non-existent. The blacks went, as far as I can remember, they went 7 grades and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
No black ever went to high school. Mm-hmm. In Pennsylvania, they did.
Mm-hmm. So these well, if they were going to school, then they probably weren't older than 12 or 13.
They were early teens.
Yeah.
Yes.
So would they actually come up to the bedroom?
Oh yes,
Uh-huh.
came right into the bedroom.
Oh.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And do you think they were asked to do that by your parents?
Oh yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And do you remember any of the songs they played?
No.
Or any
Most of them were Negro spirituals.
Uh-huh.
They were all spiritual music.
Mm-hmm. So this music they would have played at church.
That's correct. Yes. Uh-huh.
And where was their church, Daddy? Did they go to Chestnut
There
Grove?
was a black church down to the Rocks.
Is it the Chestnut Grove Church?
I'm not sure.
Up above Allie Arnold's store?
Yes, that's it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was it. Uh-huh. Yep.
Do you know how Leon came to our family?
Leon worked for a family by the name of Bears. On the way, I was actually on the way to Hickory.
Oh, the Barrow family.
The Bear family.
B-A-R-R-O-W.
I believe that's correct.
Just before you get to Hickory on the left-hand side.
That is correct.
Yeah.
And his brother worked for Uncle Raymond. I can't recall offhand what the brother's name was. But through that's how he came to Daddy.
So the brother had worked out well for Uncle Raymond, and this, what was his name, the fellow, the white man that from North Carolina?
Kate Garrison.
Kate Garrison, he had moved on.
He would moved on.
Now, and he lived in the little house, the log house where the Captain Lowe's house.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yep, that was the tenant house. There was no plumbing, no running water. They carried the water from the spring house, and then later on carried it from the barn. And there was a small barn there, which was the original barn and house of the property.
So that would have been the Lowe farmstead.
That was a Lowe farmstead.
Okay, I remember both the house and the barn.
Yes.
Yes. We used it for loafing shed and then extra hay storage, as I
At one
remember.
time, yes.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah. And the spring was down at where the pond is.
That is, yes.
And at the same corner there at where the spring head is for the pond.
There were actually two springs. There was one that was the spring head for the pond, and then there was one that's on the east end that was at the foot of a tree, and in my very early childhood, there was a small spring house there, and that's where they took the milk and set it down in the water to cool it, because there was no way of refrigerating the milk.
So there were two spring houses?
No, only
just
one spring house.
So there was a spring house just below Captain Lowe's house. So at the other end of where the pond is today.
Yes, that's right. The spring that is there now was formed up, and a pipe ran east to what they called
The Ram?
the Ram, which pumped water up into a tank into the top of the house, and through that they had running water in the house, virtually under the pressure of the water falling from the third story to the second story bathroom. But that was the source of water to the house, was from the Ram.
Now there are two finished bedrooms in the third story. So was this tank in the unfinished area of the house?
It was beyond. There was a little cubby hole beyond one of the bedrooms, and it was in that room. There, as a matter of fact, the platform to it was still there, as I remember.
That's the area we actually used as an attic.
Yes.
Okay.
Storage area.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Interesting. With a little door you had to bend down
Yes,
to get into it.
that's correct.
That's where we kept all our Christmas ornaments and
that's
such
it.
things.
Mhm.
Yeah. And yeah, very interesting.
Mhm.
So while we're in the house, so there are those two bedrooms at the top of the house, and then there are the three bedrooms on the second story, where there's still there was heat. One of those rooms was unheated, and then two bedrooms that were heated. And
When before the furnace, no bedrooms were heated.
I see. When was the furnace put in?
I want to say about 1936 or 37.
That was done with your parents then.
Yes.
Okay. So when the radiators were put in.
Yes.
Okay. And had that been done when you were ill?
I think it was.
Okay.
So, because yes, I think
You were about 5 years old then.
5, 6. Yes. Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yes.
So that would have been, say, around 1936. Was it? Do you remember the season of the year, or were you sick all that year, or?
No, I do not recall that.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So, when you said up to your bedroom, which was your bedroom of the three? There was the room over the kitchen, which had a separate staircase that went up to it.
Actually, the room over the kitchen, I slept on a cot, and that was actually Uncle Johnny's room. But I slept on a cot in that room.
Okay. And then did your parents have the room with the bay window?
Yes.
And then Aunt Mary Louise was in the front room?
That is correct.
And did they ever use the two little bedrooms on the third floor?
Not that I remember. Uncle Johnny moved up there in later years, and then they gave me the whole bedroom over the kitchen.
Okay. Do you have any idea why that room was not heated when they put in heating in the rest of the house?
Which room was that?
The room we're talking about over the kitchen. Because that was my bedroom. Before it was my bedroom, we called it the cold room, because it was the only room on the second floor that didn't have a radiator.
You got me there.
Okay.
I don't
All
remember.
right. Okay. Yeah, before I slept in that room, we called it the cold room. You say, go up to the cold room, go up to the cold room to the closet and find thus and such.
The only thing I could say probably that that made that not feasible was the fact that the pipes would have came up through the kitchen, and the kitchen, actually part of that was over the undug cellar.
Right, right, because we dug that out when I was 15 or 16.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember that. Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, let's go back to Leon and his family. What was Leon's wife's name?
Irene.
Leon and Irene Wells. And do you know what family she was from?
No.
Okay.
No.
And you talked about these two older boys, Dennis and
Henry.
And then there was, we called him Roman Wells.
Now Dennis and Henry were sons of the other brother. Leon's sons were Junior, which was Leon Jr., and Roman.
Roman, we called it. So Henry and
Dennis
were actually Leon's nephews.
That's correct.
Okay. So how did they get to the Maples farm to serenade you? Did they come up from Uncle Raymond's place? Or?
I'm not exactly sure, but it just seemed like to me they lived there for a while. I don't know why they did live there, but they did.
Well, it would have been that much closer to their school.
Yes.
So that's possible.
And the fact that black children could not ride on the school buses.
Right. Did they walked over there?
They walked to school. They walked. Yes.
And that's about 4 or 5 miles, I would think.
From Uncle Raymond's?
No, from our place, from the Maples farm.
To the black school?
Yeah.
Yes.
And then it'd be another 5 miles to Uncle Raymond's.
Yes.
Yeah. So by boarding with Leon and Irene, that might have been what made it possible for them to go to school.
I think that if I remember right, they did run a black school bus, and it was a bus of the 30s. It had the seats were parallel benches. They were not actually seats, but they were parallel benches in it. And it seemed like to me they did run a black school bus, but that was later on.
Now, Leon worked with your father in the barn and the fields, and then did Irene work with your mother in the house?
Irene worked at mother's 1 day a week.
To clean.
And she, interesting enough, we have a colored lady by the name of Miss Cora, who lived over just beyond the Ford farm. I'm not sure it was on the Street farm. I believe it was on the Street farm over going towards Jarrettsville. And she worked for mother for years. She worked for mother for 1 day a week, and worked for Miss Etta Heaps 1 day a week, and of course they carried gossip from one to the other. And then I just remember Miss Core because Uncle Johnny was. He had his driver's license, and he would take her home, and I would ride with him. And of course, Uncle Johnny drove like a maniac, and that was mainly to scare Miss Cora.
Where did she live?
As I said, on the Deer Creek, and I'm not sure whether it was the Ford's property or the Street's property.
I see.
Going towards Jarrettsville.
Yeah. Okay, and then next door to the Maples farm was the home of Dr. Street.
Dr. Famous.
Dr. Famous, rather.
Dr. Famous and his wife, who was I.W. Heaps' sister, lived next door.
Do you remember her name?
All I know is Mrs. Famous.
Uh-huh.
But they had, I guess, about 2 acres of land there, but they also had a farm over on Holy Cross Road. But at this farm, at the Highland, they maintained 2 chicken houses, a large garden, maybe 2 or 3 Jersey cows, and at the south end of the property was a small house where Ted Johnson lived.
Mm-hmm.
And Ted Johnson, of course, worked, well, before Ted Johnson was a man by the name of Stewart. And I don't remember when he died or left or whatever, but it was very early in my childhood.
And so they had a farm though also on Holy Cross Road. Now there was the Day farm that then Cousin Russell took over on the Holy Cross.
This farm actually was almost across from Holy Cross Church.
Okay, so it was on the other side of Route 24, whatever the name of that road is. Or is it on this side of 24?
It was on the east side of 24.
Okay,
but
that way, yeah.
But it did face, it did
Yeah.
face on 24.
Now, did some of the Sadlers live in there at that time?
That I don't
Not
know.
at that time. Okay.
No.
Yeah.
There was a family by the name of, thunder, what was the name? Sagner. The Sagners lived
The Sagners lived there.
kind of west of Holy Cross Church. And
That's who I'm thinking of. Were they the Masons?
They did the butchering.
The butchering. That was it. Yeah.
They husked the corn. They had a truck that went around and whitewashed board fences and dairy barns because they required that the dairy barns be white and clean. And I don't know why they thought this made the milk more pure, but they did.
Well, those laws were all made on the supposition of open buckets.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
And then when you had closed systems, they didn't change
Did not change
the regulations.
We did not have to be in white, but then they came and said all the ceilings had to be sealed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So right. So I think Mrs. Sagner of that family, I think was the manager of the cafeteria at Highlands School.
That was a daughter.
That was a daughter.
That
Okay.
was a
Or
daughter.
daughter-in-law maybe.
No, it was a daughter.
Daughter. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it was a daughter.
Yeah. Yeah. They were instrumental for everyone in the community.
They were very much needed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
They did a lot of good work.
So you're
Mrs. Sagner had the gift of removing warts.
Hmm.
She would rub, it seemed like to me it was a grain of corn on the wart and it would go away.
Was that thought of as a form of what do they call it in York? And they call it powwow up in York, where it's a kind of magic, white magic. Was it thought of that way in the community?
Yes, it was. Yes. Yeah, a lot of people went to Mrs. Sagner to have their warts. Matter of fact, she removed one from my right there.
And he's pointing to the inside of his his middle finger on his left hand.
You can still see.
I see the scar.
Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Interesting. And she rubbed a kernel of corn on it?
As I remember, she just rubbed a kernel of corn on it.
Did she say a formula?
She did.
Had a chant or
Yes.
something?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. That I had never heard tell of that in our area. When I was a pastor in York, I heard about that all the time when I first went up there. But that's the first time I've ever heard it in our community. Yeah. So there was Leon Wells at our place, the Maples Farm, and then there was Ted Johnson down behind the famous place. And so they had their kind of their farmstead in in town almost, you might say, thinking of Highland.
Mhm.
And then the farm where the crops were grown were down on Holy Cross Road.
Correct.
Now, was that a dowry for Mrs. Famous from the Heapses, or?
That I don't know.
Okay.
I just know it was there. It was not really a money-making farm.
Mhm.
It was all I remember. It was there. Locally, Mrs. Famous sold her eggs. They had Jersey cows and churned butter. And my mother bought butter from them. And I remember one time, it was lunchtime, and my father demanded butter for his bread, and we were out of butter. So, Georgie, go over to Mrs. Famous's and get a pound of butter. Well, Dr. Famous, what dear soul he was, he had a candy jar of hardtacks, and well, come on, have some hardtack. And I'd sit down and had some hardtack, and we talked and talked and talked, and first thing I know, the phone rang, and and my mother asked Mrs. Famous if I was okay, and she said, "Well, yeah, he's sitting there talking to Dr. Famous, eating hardtack." She said, "Well, send him home. George wants his butter for his lunch."
You called it dinner, though.
Yeah, it was dinner at that
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
Yes.
And how much trouble did you get in when you got
Oh,
home?
none at all. No, actually, Dr. Famous was in the trouble. He was a dear man.
So it's interesting that even though he was a professional man, he was a physician, he was a medical doctor,
He was a medical doctor.
but they still needed to sell things out the kitchen door, so to speak, to make ends meet.
That's correct, because he did a lot of, today they call it pro bono, but he did a lot of work that he never got paid for. I mean, if you were sick, if he would make you well, and if you had money, you paid him. If you didn't have money, it didn't matter. He still.
Did people pay in, and of course we're still talking about the Depression era.
It was during the Depression years.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, I mean, that would have probably been the story you just told when you were maybe 7 or 8 or 9 years old.
Yes.
So, toward the end of the 30s, but still when the Depression was on.
Mhm.
Daddy, when people couldn't pay, would they pay him in kind? Would they give him a sack of, I don't know,
That
beans
I
or-
don't know whether
Okay.
they paid him in kind or not. He was very, very respected and very well thought of.
Now, he was the leading Republican in the area.
That is correct.
with Dave Harry,
Dave Harry.
the two
yes.
of them.
Yes.
And your father was one of the leading Democrats.
Also, James Durans.
Was a leading Democrat.
Yes, that's right.
was a Democrat.
Durans were Democrat.
Okay.
Wilson Heaps, I.W. Heaps were Democrats.
But they weren't so active in the
No.
political part. But the Durans and the Harrys and the Famouses
And the Robinsons.
and the Robinsons on the Republican side.
Yes.
So the Harrys, the Robinsons, and the Famouses on the Republican side, the Durans, and your father was prominent too.
Very adamant.
And who else on the Democratic side? Because of course, old Mr. Duran went to the House of Delegates.
Well, it seems like to me Ralph and Harry Davis. I
Uh-huh.
think they were very strong.
But they were Republicans.
Were they?
I think so.
Well, it could be. It was interesting. They were all good friends until election time. Election time, they would hardly speak to one another. But as soon as the election was over, they were all good friends again.
Yes. Yeah. So
And Daddy was election deputy, appointed by the sheriff for as long as I can remember. And when he passed away, I was appointed in his place to be election deputy.
do you remember which sheriff it was that asked you to take his place?
No, not
Okay.
offhand.
We can look up the list of sheriffs and see who was sheriff in 1957. So, yeah. So it was almost a hereditary position.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
Which,
Well, as being, well, we won't go into that right now, but I was thinking about the Postal Service.
right, which was all, that was hereditary too. For example, it went from Charles Glass. That's another Republican family. The Glasgows were strong Republicans.
McBrides were Democrat.
Uh-huh.
So if the Republicans were in office, Charlie Glasgow was postmaster. If the Democrats were in office, Mrs. McBride was postmaster.
I thought that after Mr. McBride died, then that they let her be postmistress to help provide for the family.
Mm-hmm.
Was that only when the Democrats were in, or did she stay?
That was when the Democrats were in
I
office,
see.
yes.
So that's why she got that position, but it still was only when the Democrats were
That's
in.
true.
How did she live when the Republicans were in? But that didn't happen
Well,
very much.
I don't. In my days, I don't remember Republicans ever being in power.
I see. Okay. Interesting. But then how did Charles Glasgow become postmaster? Because he did.
Well, I don't remember him being postmaster. He was assistant postmaster.
Okay. Maybe it was only after
I think it
the
was after
patronage.
Mr. McBride died
Uh-huh.
that he became postmaster.
And then they ended the patronage.
Yes.
It became a civil service
Yes.
position.
Mhm.
Yeah. Hmm. So, and can you tell the story about when Aunt Mary Louise went over and surprised Mrs. Famous and her apron caught fire because she was smoking a...
Oh, no, I don't remember that story, but I remember my mother sent me over one time for butter, and I could not find Mrs. Famous, and I can't remember the black lady's name that worked for Mrs. Famous. It seemed like to me it was the Stewart's wife, but she said, "Oh, Miss Famous down at the chicken house." So I went down to the chicken house, and there's Mrs. Famous sitting there smoking a cigar. Which I was quite shocked because I'd never seen a woman smoke before, and especially a cigar.
But now, did your father smoke cigars? Did the men smoke cigars?
My father always smoked cigars and chewed Brown's Mule tobacco.
And smoked a pipe too?
He smoked the pipe, yes.
Yeah.
Prince Albert tobacco.
Do you remember the story when I took up the pipe that he just set down? And this was one that Aunt Mary Louise used to tell. And that they came looking for me, and I was sitting in his chair with my Yankees baseball cap on. We'll have to see if Uncle Sam remembers that story.
Now, I don't remember that story, but I remember Daddy, I'm not sure whether he was driving the tractor doing something, and he had you on his lap, and you kept reaching up in his pocket, up in his shirt pocket to get his Brown's Mule tobacco.
You said that I was riding with him on the tractor the day before he died, I think.
That very well could be. Yes, I think that's correct.
Was that the Ford that had the spread front?
Now the Ford belonged to Uncle Johnny.
Okay.
It was more likely an H Farmall.
The H Farmall. Very good. So we made mention a little bit ago about in those days that it was dinner in the middle of the day. So let's talk about what the meals were. So what would you have for breakfast?
Daddy always had 2 soft-boiled eggs and toast for breakfast. As long as I can remember, they were soft-boiled eggs and toast for breakfast.
Now, and this was after he'd done the morning milking.
Yes.
And he went to the barn hungry? He went to the barn with an empty stomach?
As far as I know, yes.
Yeah. And didn't he have a little bowl of prunes too with his breakfast?
Always had prunes.
And these were stewed
Prunes, and after the eggs, usually a bowl of cornflakes or something in that nature.
So in a sense he had a 3-course breakfast.
Yes, he did.
The prunes, the eggs and toast, Did he break those eggs into the bowl and then
And then
break up the
and then
toast?
broke up toast and put that in.
Sort of mixed it together.
Mixed it
That's a
together.
wonderful way to eat soft-boiled eggs.
Yep,
Yes, it
that's
is.
what he did.
Yeah, and then a bowl of cereal, of dry
Mm-hmm.
cereal afterwards.
And even after Mother died, then he fixed his own
Uh-huh.
soft-boiled eggs.
Now, in the winter, would it, instead of having dry cereal, might he have oatmeal?
Yes,
Okay,
oatmeal or cream of wheat.
or cream of wheat?
Yeah.
Okay. And then back out to work all morning. That would have been around, what, 8:30 to come in for breakfast?
Usually about 7:30.
7:30 for breakfast. So, and then a few minutes in the easy chair after breakfast, let his breakfast settle, and then back out to
Yeah,
work.
and unless if it was worst day, he would. Are we stopped? Or, if it was worst day, he would set up mother's laundry tubs on the back porch, and of course we had hot water from. In early days, the hot water came from the cook stove. It had a water tank hooked to it, and he would fix our wash tubs up for wash day. That was usually on Monday. Monday was always wash day. Other days, maybe he would bring in firewood for the stove. He was very good to Mother. He made sure she had everything that he could help her with, and then he would go out and do the wiring work.
So, I mean, even in the summer, you needed firewood because you cooked with
You
firewood.
still needed firewood.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the kitchen was a hot
It was
place.
a hot place.
Yeah. So there was no summer kitchen.
No.
Did some of the farms have summer
Yes,
kitchens?
it did. Hmm. I don't remember any in the Highland community having summer kitchens, but our Uncle Charles had a summer kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
Our friend Mr. Rigert in later years, they had a summer kitchen
Where did the Rugerts live?
in Baltimore.
Okay. And how did they become?
In the Hamilton area, somehow or another his wife was related to Donald or Mabel Stubbs
I
somehow
see.
or another. And when his wife died, he was looking for someone or a couple to come in and keep house for him.
Hmm.
And at that time, Uncle Johnny and Aunt Clara were living in an apartment over top of Wilson Heath's garage. And Donald Stubbs approached him, Uncle Johnny, and about this factor because I think Uncle Johnny had just started working at Martin's. And so they went down and interviewed with Mr. Rigert, and so it made it real convenient for Uncle Johnny because he didn't have as far to drive to work, working at Martin's. And they kept house for Mr. Rigert for a number of years.
So going back to the meals, so he would either do his own work or help your mother with her work, but then when the morning's work was done, dinner was at noon.
12 o'clock.
12 o'clock.
On the button.
On the button.
And one thing I always thought my father took pride in, morning, noon, or night, he always combed his hair before he went to the table. Never went to the table without his hair being brushed.
Do you remember this saying? Aunt Mary Louise used to quote this to me, that your father would say, just because you're a farmer doesn't mean you have to go to town with manure on your boots.
Yes, he was very astute about you left the farm at home.
Yeah. And so, what sorts of food would you have for your dinner then? Did that vary from season to season? So depend on what you had in the garden?
I really don't remember, only thing I can say is it was almost a repeat of lunch. I mean, it was another big meal.
Well, no, that's what I mean. I'm talking about the midday meal, the dinner.
Oh, the midday meal was either chicken or pork chops or, of course, in the wintertime we had fresh meat. The beef hung in the corn crib, and Dad would go down and cut off whatever Mother wanted. The pork was either canned, mostly it was canned.
You had your own pigs?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
What kind of pigs did you keep?
Berkshire.
Oh, you had Berkshires
Yeah.
too.
Mm-hmm.
And did that have anything to do with the Galbraiths having Berkshire pigs?
No. Actually, I think originally they came to Galbraith.
That they did come from the Galbraiths. And then the cows were Guernseys.
Yep.
Golden Guernsey cows.
Mm-hmm.
And the beef that was killed, was that an old cow that was culled?
No, it was never an old cow. It was usually a young cow that was not productive.
So maybe had a quarter go out in the udder, like it was only milking on three quarters. Or
No,
something like
just one that was not really productive.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So the old cows, what was done with them?
They went to Baltimore Market.
I see.
Down to Mr. Charlie Walters. Either would buy them at the farm or he would haul them to Baltimore for a fee.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So your father wanted to eat tender meat.
Also, Mr. Bill Taylor ran the rat to Baltimore stockyards.
And Mr. Bill Taylor is not Mr. Will Taylor.
Yes.
That is, okay.
Yes.
He's the one that had the place where I live.
Yes.
The Taylor place.
Yes, at that time
And he's the one that then lived in the little trailer.
with Miss Mercy Huff,
Right.
his sister-in-law.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would ride my bicycle down and play checkers with him.
Well, yes, because that started when I was working in the fields down at the Taylor place, or the Martin place, and I would take you down and ask Mr. Taylor if he minds babysitting you, and he'd say, "No, come on in," and he would tell you a wild tale, and you would all be buggy-eyed, and he'd say, "Now, Jeffrey, do you believe that?" He said, "Yes, sir, Mr. Taylor, I believe that." He said, "That's not true. That's just a story."
So why was it that you took me down there to be babysat? Where was Mom? You can't remember. Okay.
Gone.
You mean just forgotten? You don't remember why? Okay. So then what else that you would eat? You'd always had meat of some kind.
Always had meat. Mother would can from pork, and they called it mouse meat. And I could never figure out why in the world they called canned pork mouse meat, but it was good. It was pre-cooked and then canned.
So these were like ground pork.
No, it was hunks of pork, and she would make like seemed like to me like a pork stew out of it, things like that.
Mm-hmm. And then the vegetables would be either fresh from the garden or whatever she
Or canned.
canned.
Yes.
There were no frozen. There was no freezer. in
No,
those
the
days.
freezer didn't come till after 1946.
So after she died.
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, and it seemed like to me, I'm not sure whether it was 44 or 45, Gailey's opened up what they called a locker plant. And it was individual storage areas that you had a key to, and it was frozen food.
Mm-hmm. Where was that? In Delta?
Yes, in Delta.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
So,
And actually, there was one in Bel Air also. I remember at one time we had a locker in Bel Air.
so the sorts of things that she grew in the garden, beans, presumably.
No, nothing in the garden was frozen.
No, but I mean, what did she grow in the garden?
Oh my goodness.
That was her domain. The garden, the chickens in the garden were your mother's domain.
Yes, potatoes, green beans, beets, peppers, onions. That was just basically a lot of tomatoes, canned a lot of tomatoes.
So peas, you had peas and onions and.
Peas, lima beans.
But in the springtime would have been peas, and then did you have leaf lettuce? Did you grow leaf
Yes,
lettuce?
she grew leaf lettuce, yeah.
And then with spring onions, would you have
Yes,
salad out of that?
Green onions, cabbage, a lot of cabbage. Just anything in the vegetable line.
And
Now, she didn't grow parsnips or anything like that. We just didn't.
and no fall garden. It was mostly a spring and summer garden.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So no Brussels sprouts or so the cabbage she grew was spring cabbage.
Yes, but I do remember at one time they used to bury cabbage.
Mm-hmm.
They would dig a pit and put straw in and put a layer of cabbage down and then more straw and that cabbage would stay all winter.
Then they probably did grow fall cabbage. They did that.
I think so.
But anything else in the fall?
Cabbage and potatoes, the only thing I really remember.
So by the 1st of October, your garden was put
Finished.
Yeah.
Yeah. The pumpkins were growing out in the cornfields.
And what did you do? Did you feed the pumpkins to the cows?
Nope. It was all for pumpkin pies or,
So they were sugar pumpkins.
yeah, sugar pumpkins. Yes.
But how many of them could you use? You couldn't use.
Well, that's right. You couldn't use very many, and I don't recall her canning pumpkins, but yet we had pumpkin pie during the winter, so she must have canned some pumpkin.
Or do you remember them storing pumpkins under the beds?
No.
No. Okay. Yeah. So and then for dessert, what would you have dessert at dinner time?
Well, it all depends on what was in. And the far southern part of the farm was where they had piled up brush and stumps and things to burn when they were clearing the land, and there was a huge blackberry patch. So Mother would pick a lot of blackberries and can them. So we would have berry pie.
Cobbler. Did you have cobbler?
Oh yeah, we had a lot of apple pies, peach pies. And of course, peaches were in season, but you did can a lot of peaches. We had a lot of can of peaches.
Did you have a little orchard there?
Yes, there was an orchard. It was. I don't know how to describe it.
Was it below what was the garden?
No, the orchard was kind of midway back in the farm.
Oh, it was. Okay. Like back where that little grove is?
No. I don't know how to describe it. About halfway back was an original orchard of the farm.
Oh, really?
And
So what in that wooded area though? I mean, there's only the 15 acres in the
okay,
front.
you know where the locust grove used to be?
Yes.
Okay, it was it was north of the locust grove.
But that was there before your family
That
went.
was there when they bought the farm.
Okay.
And it was the first apples were crab apples, and
To make jelly out of that.
made jelly out of it. And there was several different apple trees, and of course there was what they call the good old cider apples.
And your father took a pickup load of cider apples to somebody to mill for him?
It went down to Waters Mill. Waters Mill had a cider press. And they always got a barrel of apple cider made.
Do you remember what apples he took down for that?
Wine saps
Mm-hmm.
was one. That was the main one I remember. It was kind of a tart. Seemed like to me it was a kind of a tart apple.
Uh-huh. Yeah, so that was the main one, but there have been some others too. But it was a pickup load of apples he took down
Yes.
to come home with a 50-gallon barrel.
A 50-gallon barrel of apple cider.
apple
And it's
cider.
always a new whiskey barrel
And did he, so it was a new barrel every year?
every year.
Every year.
Yeah.
And the barrel sat in the smokehouse?
No, they put
where-
it in the basement.
in the basement, because he was still smoking meat in the smokehouse.
That's correct.
Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting. So you remember using that smokehouse
Oh,
to
yes.
smoke meat.
Mhm.
So there were pies, and besides pies, what other kind of desserts would your mother make? Did she make puddings or?
Chocolate pudding, cakes,
Cakes.
a lot of different cakes. Devil's food cake, that was the main one because we did like a lot of chocolate. We were a chocolate family.
And then was ice cream reserved for Sunday afternoon?
Ice cream was a special thing because it was homemade.
But I thought you went over to the store on Sunday afternoon and bought ice cream.
The store was not open on Sundays.
Oh, it was not.
No.
Okay. So what's the story that Aunt Mary Louise used to tell, that the men got a pint of ice cream and the women a half a pint?
That I don't
You
know.
remember that?
No.
Okay.
The only thing I remember about a pint of ice cream was in later years when Smith Water was the director at the bank, and Daddy was pretty much retired, and every Tuesday they would meet at Ralph Street's filling station at 12:15, and they would sit out front and each of them eat a pint of ice cream.
And Mr. Walter would tell your father went on at the bank board
Yeah,
meeting.
as much as he could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yep. Yeah, Street Service Station was,
It was a focal point.
yeah, it was about like a men's club. There were always men
Always.
gathering there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they sold ice cream and snacks and
Yep.
sodas, and
And
that
the
was
men-
not a small part of their business, I would imagine.
It was very much. And the men ranged in ages from probably 16 to 60, I
Yeah.
would say.
Yeah. So that was dinner, and then your supper was a lighter meal, in the evening meal after the
Yes.
milking.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Maybe warm-ups or soup.
A lot of it was warm-ups.
And
Sometimes it was left over from dinner.
Yeah. What about soup? Did your mother make very much?
A lot of soup. In the wintertime, a lot of soup.
And that would have been a typical supper.
Mostly vegetable soup.
Yeah.
And chicken noodle soup.
Yeah.
Chicken rice. Oh, she made a delicious chicken rice soup. It was good.
And now that was from spent chickens. The chickens that were killed for soup were spent chickens.
They were ones that didn't lay.
Yeah. Oh, okay. But the ones that were cooked for frying were young.
Young chickens.
Cockerels usually, or
Mostly always roosters.
yeah.
Always roosters.
And
Because mostly she would buy from Uncle Charles what they called pullets. And maybe she would get 100 straight runs,
mhm.
which you would probably get at least 25 roosters out of it. Because usually pullets ran 2-to-1 to roosters.
And that's one of the things that you were expected to do as a child, was to.
I hated when my mother said, go out and kill a couple roosters. I hated to do that.
And from what age would that have been your job?
Oh, 8 years old.
And so by 8 or 9, I mean, your mother showed you the first few times.
Yeah, I learned probably from Leon.
Oh, from Leon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
He was your first teacher on the farm.
Oh, he was a great teacher. He knew all the the shortcuts, the things to save.
Emotion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
He taught me how to, what to call wet a scythe. It was, you took a whetstone and sharpened the scythe. Just, yeah, Leon was a great teacher.
So you'd be sent
I
down.
cried at his wedding, at his funeral rather.
Well, you mentioned that your father died in August of 1957. And how much longer did Leon live?
You know, I don't really recall, but so Bart was born in '59.
Bart was born in 57.
57.
Just after your
Eric
father.
was born in '59.
Yeah, Bart was born just after your father died. That was November.
I would
Grandpa
say
died.
Leon maybe lived a year, maybe 2 years after that.
Okay.
That's just a wild guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, he died of a stroke.
And had Irene already died?
No, Irene was still living.
Yeah.
So Irene and her sons lived in the house, and Romy, was named Roman, we called him Romy, her youngest son worked for me for several years.
Yeah. Now, and they were still living at the Taylor place where I live.
That's correct.
But then Romy and his family lived at the Martin house,
No.
didn't they? They always lived at the Taylor place.
Yeah.
So you had rented out the Martin house
Yes.
to others. Okay.
Yeah.
Hmm. But Romy didn't work out. He had a problem with alcohol, didn't he?
Mm,
Or did he just leave to find another job?
I think that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay.
No, I don't remember him having alcohol.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, but so let's finish up with meals, because we've been at this for a while, a good little while, an hour. So let's finish up and talk about going to church and Sunday dinner. So when you went to church, you saw the whole family, everybody that was still in the area. I mean, there were a couple of the sisters that moved away, but all four of the brothers were there.
Mhm.
And Aunt Mary was there.
And Eleanor.
And Aunt Eleanor. So really it was only...
Six siblings still went to church.
Yeah. And Aunt Margaret was going to Fawn Grove Methodist, I think,
right.
with the Merrimans. Okay. And so that only left, was it Aunt Hattie?
Aunt Hattie was...
That was your grandfather's sister. I'm trying to think. Who's the fourth sister? There's Margaret, Mary, Eleanor, and who are we missing? Weren't there four sisters and four brothers?
I don't think so.
Anyway, 6 of the 7. You saw 6 sets of uncles and aunts and first cousins every week at church.
Mm-hmm.
Your grandfather, grandmother Wilson. And at that time they were living at the Stone House they were living over the Wilson place. So once upon a time they lived at the Stone House on what had been the Davis property, there above Halsey's store.
I don't recall it being the Davis property. It was called the Halsey property.
Of the Halsey property. But didn't they live in that Stone House?
Yes, they did there, but Uncle Billy lost that in a crap game, in a card game. And that's when they moved up to the other farm.
Uh-huh.
I don't know the details.
Grandpa Billy.
Yes.
Yes,
Mhm.
yeah. And that's when they moved. Aunt Mary Louise told the story that your grandfather and grandmother were on the buggy riding into Bel Air and that Grandma figured out a way that they could finagle things and save the farm. Do you remember?
No, I don't.
But then they
remember
moved. But then they moved into that, and they did save the farm.
They did save the
Yeah,
farm.
okay.
Yeah.
So that's where they were living, and they'd be at church, and one of the things that was not known until you went to church was who she would invite to Sunday dinner.
She always invited one of the children or two of the children, whatever she had plans for, but you never knew until church, after church, who was invited.
So what did you do about your own Sunday dinner? If you didn't know if you were invited, it was a command performance.
Well,
you couldn't really say no.
There was actually, it was really no problem, because all you had to do was go down the cellar and get some cans and jars and heat them up, and you had Sunday dinner.
I see.
Um,
So nobody knew what they were doing for Sunday dinner until Grandma
she was the
pronounced.
she was the deciding factor.
Yeah. Whether you went home and cooked dinner or had the afternoon off.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it was always, it was never just one family. It was usually at least 2 or 3 families.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So a couple times a month, you had dinner with other family members and your grandparents. Your
Probably
Wilson grandparents.
either went to the Schusters or went to the Wilsons.
Most Sundays.
Yes.
Okay. And at the Wilsons, what would your grandmother Wilson have for Sunday dinner?
Always roast beef. Always roast beef.
Now, was this cooked tender that you could
Oh,
eat it with a spoon?
You could have used a spoon. Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably started at Saturday afternoon sometime. I
Uh-huh.
don't know. Because that was on a cook stove, and you could stick it in the oven and it would just sit there and cook, and
Yeah.
all you had to do is keep basting it. And, yeah.
And then mashed potatoes, I would imagine.
Always mashed potatoes, yeah. And usually vegetables out of the garden or out of the canned goods.
So you'd have canned vegetables, probably canned applesauce,
Yes.
and then was she a baker? Did she bake bread or bake rolls?
Well, I don't remember my grandmother other than being an invalid.
Really?
Uh-huh. My grandmother was always, both grandmothers were always in a chair whenever I saw them.
Well, who made dinner then?
The hired help.
Huh?
She had, don't remember the black
So
lady.
she just kind of oversaw things.
it, yeah.
Well, then who did the colored? So she had a colored cook basically,
Right.
colored help that helped.
Mhm.
And did that woman bake bread or bake
Oh,
rolls?
yes. Mhm.
Okay. What about at your family? Did your mother bake bread or bake rolls?
Every week. We never had store-bought bread. We was always baker's bread. If we got store-bought bread, that was a real treat.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
Because it was gooey.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
So did she have a baking day? Or did she have to bake a couple times?
But probably a certain, it was not wash day, that's for sure.
What day was wash day?
I think it was Tuesday.
Tuesday was wash day. Did you have a wash house?
No.
So that-
on the back porch.
That was in the back porch. Okay. Yeah. So, and then, so,
Originally, there was a back house, a wash house. I can barely remember where the garage sits. There were 2 small buildings, and one was the wash house, and the other one was a woodshed with a toilet facility on the back side of it.
but there was an inside toilet
Yes.
because of the water
the
from
water
the tank,
quality,
from the
yeah.
ram. Yeah.
Mhm.
So, but do you remember the family that helped at your grandma and grandpa Wilson's?
No, I don't.
Uh-huh. But she must have been a good cook.
Yes, she was.
Yeah.
Seemed like me, her name was Mag.
Oh, was that still old Mag?
I think that
Who was
old
born
Mag.
in slavery? This is the one who was born in slavery.
I think that is correct.
And we're
If,
Uncle.
if it was a Mag, it was her daughter.
Uh-huh.
It was that family.
So, and at that time, were Uncle Kenneth and Aunt.
Uncle Kenneth was still single.
Oh, so he was living. He was living there with them.
I'm pretty sure.
And then Aunt Marguerite married him, and then they lived there
yes.
together. Okay.
And after Uncle Kenneth married Aunt Marguerite, everything changed.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't think they had the black family anymore.
Hmm.
I think that's right.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
And then over at the Schusters, when you went there for Sunday dinner, who cooked for? Then, if she was an invalid, who cooked for her?
Well, I don't really remember too many family dinners there other than Easter. And we always had Easter dinner there, as I recall. And I can never forget why we always had hot dogs for Easter dinner.
Mm-hmm.
And as I got older, then I realized that the hot dog was a German food, and
Yeah.
that was their main dish.
So it was hot dogs and sauerkraut. And
Hot dogs, sauerkraut, mashed potatoes, gravy. Seemed like to me it was always a berry type pie because they had a lot of berry bushes, blackberries, gooseberries, all kinds of berries.
This is an impression I have that even though the Schusters had more money, that they didn't eat as well as the Wilsons. I've always had the impression that the Wilsons ate very well.
Well, that you could almost judge that by the size of the people. The five brothers, when the five brothers were at home, they weighed a half a ton, average 200 pounds apiece.
Were there 5 brothers?
Yes.
Okay, that's the 8 then. So either it was not 4 and 4, it was 5 and 3.
5 and 3.
5 and 3.
Yes.
Okay, so it was 5 and 3, and they weighed 1,000 pounds amongst them. Anyway, yeah. So that's a fact. The Wilsons ate better than the
Wilsons
Schusters.
ate.
Yeah, and the Schusters were
But they were more modern day eaters.
Yes.
I mean, they ate more healthy wise.
yes,
But
yeah,
it was always eggs.
yeah,
We ate a lot of eggs.
yeah.
and at Easter time, we had these, they were white chickens and white eggs, but we had these brown eggs, and I could never figure out what that was, but they boiled them in onion skins,
Mm-hmm.
and that made
Mm-hmm.
the brown
For
eggs.
Easter.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
Easter.
yeah.
That was the covered eggs.
Yeah, yeah.
Boiled in onion skins.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, I think we've had a good start.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you very much, and